and I'm Caleb Chen, and along with my colleagues, Dave Globig and also the Randy Lewis, we represent the business school, Gainey School of Business, and unfortunately, Professor Knight is not able to make it. He is with us in his spirit, and he has his foot elevated like a 6 foot high to alleviate the pain that's caused him. So his doctor told him well, you should stay home. And we told him that it's okay. Just stay home, and we have things covered. The topic today is does overlooking human rights issues in international business make good business sense? If we take straw votes today, how many of you think that is yes? How many say no? Okay. Yeah, 9. I'm in the German class. So a lot of you say no, but I also see that a lot of you without any response, so you don't know. Well, maybe this workshop is going to help you to come to an answer one way or another. So we'll take from there. Let's define some keywords so that we can frame the session. Otherwise, we'll be going so many different directions. So one thing is about overlooking. I chose that word overlooking, but it's not any different from disregarding and violating in terms of the outcome. I can overlook the traffic signs and run the red light. The outcome is, I have an accident. I can say to the police, don't give me a ticket. I have just overlooked the signs. It's not going to go, it won't get me out of the situation. The outcome is the same, even though the intentionality can differ. Are you beyond that? So business people, owners can say, I've overlooked human rights issues. Might be because it is negligence in law, but it does not get you out of trouble. It might be the extent to which you have violated the laws rather than you are not held liable. Human rights, is defined as the rights inherent to all human beings, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination, and these rights are all interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. So that captures what human rights are all about. And later on, we're going to watch a video clip that talks about the UN, United Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That is more comprehensive, but also a little bit more entertaining than Caleb Chen speaking to you or reading the slides to you. Now, in the international business, we need to frame the case. We're talking about imports, exports. We're talking about foreign direct investments. When, say, an entrepreneur decides to go to, say, India and set up a factory and hire local people, let's say the 500 local people were hired, and also the pay tax when the profit is made, it's called the foreign direct investment. It's very atypical for the entrepreneur to take 500 people from, say, Michigan and take them to India when they have access to the local labor force. They might send some of the top people, the management, to India rather than sending people over to run the entire factory, including the hourly workers. You have heard of the idea of outsourcing. A company might outsource a function to, say, might be a developing country. How many of you have experienced talking to a customer service rep over the phone? Okay, pretty much everybody. Do you know that maybe 9 out of 10 times you're talking to someone who is on the other side of the globe? even though you call at say the 11 o'clock or 3 a.m. for some college students, it's still early. It's really early. You don't have to go to bed until 4, so that you call and you talk to someone, and that person most likely does not reside in the United States, but might be that person is on a call center in India, perhaps, and in fact, they're well trained in a few regards. One is depending on where you're calling from. Let's say you that are calling from the deep south. I spent 2 years in Tennessee and 6 years in Georgia. So y'all, they're trained to speak with the accent, so the customers wouldn't think too much about, where is that person coming from? Well, they speak with the proper accents, if you will. Now that's outsourcing. Well, companies decide to outsource because it is more economical to do that rather than having their own call center housed here in the States. So what is human rights? I think I have it here already, so let's see. Well, we'll do that. It's a 3-minute clip. To pick up the keywords. I don't think it takes away from the effect. Maybe I can mind. Somebody come. Help. How many of us have seen this before? Or you know what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is all about? So this is first time. It's in 1948 when the UN put it together and passed it, and that is the Human Rights Declaration. It is defined in 30 different articles that you're welcome to check it out. And I got another link here, but I don't think we have time to go over that. And but the video clip captures the 30 articles very well. And today, when we talk about the human rights issues, it can go so different directions. If you were at the movie last night, the focus was on the human trafficking, especially in the sex trade. And Dr. Globig is going to give us some statistics later on. But Dr. Lewis is going to help us through understanding what human rights issues are all about in the international business arena by looking at a case study. And I would encourage us to focus more on some of the issues, the areas that there might be human rights issues are being violated, disregarded, and also overlooked. But regardless of intentionality, the result is the same. Examples: child and forced labor, working environment and safety standards. What happens when we buy from suppliers who knowingly or not knowingly have violated the human rights? Might be that is the suppliers who are doing that, but you're buying from them. You may not know of that, but this is an oversight. But there are times there might be because it makes more business sense, you go and buy from them anyway because their cost is lower. Depriving freedom to form labor unions. Their voice, they need to have a voice, but that you say, no, you cannot have that. And if you do talk about forming labor unions, you'll be kicked out here. You lose the job. Pay and benefits. Fair pay, decent benefits, discriminatory practices in hiring and promoting. The last two, forced overtime or taking away agreed upon vacations. And lastly is abusive relationships between employer and employee. Might be as a supervisor, you're almost acting like you're like a judge. You're like someone who are in high authority, more so than just the employer-employee relationship. I want you to think about a biblical example where maybe the example captures some, if not all, of these issues, that human rights issues are being violated, particularly in an international setting, global setting, where perhaps the internationals are being involved. Anybody? I give you a candy? No. Here now. What about this? Look at the list on the first line. Think about the different areas where human rights issues are being violated. Can you draw a line? Okay, here is an example of forced labor. Here's an example of poor working conditions. Here's an example that there's an abusive relationship. Do you agree? This is a good example. There are other examples. We don't have to go back to the history to say there are examples, but now, today, in the modern days, in the 21st century, we don't have that. The reality is it still happens around us. I want to draw our attention to the economics profit maximization model to kind of put things into context. Why are producers, businesses, sometimes what they choose to overlook, disregard, or even violate human rights issues in the international business arena. How many of you have taken econ? 2-1, 2-2, okay. Several, okay, no. But the idea of making profits or maximizing profit, there are two curves here. One is called the total cost curve function, and the other is called the total revenue function. When the gap between the two is the biggest, is where we should produce at that level. So we should be producing at the fifth unit, because while the gap between revenue and cost is the biggest. There are two ways that we can widen the gap. One is to monopolize. If, say, the Pepsi is able to monopolize the marketplace, instead of us paying $1, we have to pay 5. Because, well, if you want Pepsi, you pay 5. Because, well, there's no other beverages in the marketplace. Make sense? So you can increase the gap. Well, another way to increase the gap is to drop the cost as much as possible by using cheaper labor, materials, or might be take the entire operation elsewhere where the cost of production is much lower. So you can widen the gap, and as a result of that, profit would be maximized. If profit maximization is the only motivation of business, and the panel would agree that this should not be the case. The economic model is there to show us what might be within reason. We set the price at this level, and also we use quality, raw materials, labor, and whatnot, and we honor the biblical truths. What are some of the biblical truths that we should be honoring? Can you think of one? I feel like I'm in the lecture hall talking to people. Yes?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. That is the great commandment. Love God and love our neighbor. Good. What else? What other biblical truths point us to the direction that we should honor the human race. We should embrace the human race. I give some hints. Genesis 1:27. What does it say? You know, to quote it verbatim. Yes?
We were created in the image of God.
We were created in the image of God. Whether we are professors or students, employers, employees, and we're all the same. If you were at the church service 2 weeks ago at Spring Arbor Free Methodist Church, and the speaker gave an illustration of what does it mean that we are all created in the image of God and we're all the same. I'm not sure it's appropriate to say that. There's a 2-year-old young boy who made a comment about, we're all the same. Red, brown, yellow, black, and white. We're all the same. Because look at our poop. Our poop in our blood. Okay, very good. We got a couple of those, and then about the golden rule in Matthew 7:12. Treat others the same way you want to be treated. I also want to introduce one. That's what the Bible does talk about. Employers needing to pay employees a fair wage. The Bible says that in 3 places, more than 3 places. Jeremiah, Proverbs, and Deuteronomy. God says so. We need to do that. Now, what happens to businesses when these biblical truths are not seen as critical? Or if profit maximization is the top priority? Well, there's exploitation of human resources, and joy is most likely absent in the workplace. because while the employer is not going to create a work environment that lends itself to joy. Well-established defined relationships, potential high employee turnover, unless what these employees don't have other options. And again, what Dr. Lewis is going to use the case study to help us understand that possibility. And profit maximization that would oftentimes be achieved through unscrupulous means. Profits become the only motivation for renewed investment. Should we invest more in this third world country? Well, if it's profitable, we'll do that. If it's not, well, we'll shift gear. We'll go to another third world country where it might be the labor force is even cheaper. Think about China. Well, China has experienced a lot of growth because, well, largely the labor force is cheaper, but now it's not the cheapest. There's some other Southeast Asian countries where the labor force is less costly. Elevation of corruption, bribery, and other sinful acts. Negative publicity, which might lead to loss of customers, but I think the most important one is what God will bring judgment. We don't have to revenge, but God would do that in His own time. I'm going to skip a few slides, and in fact, well, I'm going to invite Dr. Lewis to come and share with us on the case study. And I know he wants one of these slides to be brought up.
Yes, I do.
Not a dynamic model, but this.
That's right. All right, well, welcome. How's everybody doing today? See some smiles come up. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is a case, and I've memorized the case myself, but I think it has a much better impact when I read it to you because of the way it reads. First of all, how many of you in the audience have ever owned or have ever owned anything made by, let's just be very specific, a keyboard or a printer made by Lenovo, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, or Dell? Anybody? Just about everybody? Okay, just two specific products, right? Keyboard and printer, or printer. And so you are involved in this case. You definitely are involved in this case, and you'll see why in a minute. There were two factories in China, in Guangdong, China, at the Matai. I think there are two Matai factories in Guangdong, China, that were investigated in 2008, and this report came out in 2009. They were investigated by the National Labor Committee, and I want to read this case to you because I think it'll have a huge impact on you as it did me. For those of you in international business, you've already read this case, but I know there's a couple of you out there. So at least you should have read the case. Okay, you read it. So you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the case. According to the report, at the Matai factory in Guangdong, the workers sit at the assembly line on wooden stools without backrests, 12 hours a day, with just 2 days off per month. So they work like 28 or 29 days a month. Every 7.2 seconds, a keyboard passes each worker who has to snap 6 or 7 keys in place, one key every 1.1 second. The assembly line never stops. The workplace is frantic, monotonous, numbing, and relentless. Each worker inserts 3,250 keys an hour, 35,750 keys during the official 11-hour shift, because there's some breaks, and 2 breaks during the 12-hour shift, and then 250,000 a week, performing over 1 million operations a month. While working, employees cannot talk, listen to music, or even lift their heads to look around. Workers cannot use the bathroom until there is a break. Security guards spy on the workers who are prohibited from putting their hands in their pockets and are searched when they enter and leave the factory. The factory operates 24 hours a day on 2 12-hour shifts with the workers rotating between day and night shifts each month. The workers are at the factory for 87 hours a week, and all overtime is mandatory and not paid overtime. Let's see. There are 2 half-hour meal breaks during the shift, during which workers race to the cafeteria to line up to get food, leaving them 15 minutes to eat because of the long lines. The base wage is 64 cents an hour, which drops to a take-home wage of about 41 cents an hour after deducting for primitive room and board. Workers bathe using a small plastic bucket. Summer temperatures in the factory routinely reach into the high 90s. 10 to 12 workers share each dorm room, sleeping on narrow metal bunk beds that line the walls. Comments from the workers, most of whom are young women, 18 to 25 years old, reinforce how harsh the conditions are. One stated, "Every day I work or I enter the factory and I assemble the keyboards, my hands are moving constantly and I can't stop for a second. Our fingers, hands, and arms are swollen and sore. Every day I do this for 12 hours, which makes it even worse. What makes it even worse is the constant pressure and boring monotony of the work." Another notes, "The factory rules are really like private law. We are forced to obey and endure management's harsh treatment. Some young workers have boyfriends or girlfriends outside the factory. If they want to go on a date, we have to beg the boss for mercy to be able to leave the factory compound." Another said simply, "We feel like we are serving prison sentences." So that kind of sums it up. So this, you may think this is just some case that never happens anywhere else, just one, these 2 plants, but it's all over the world. And we sit in our comfortable dorm rooms and in our comfortable offices, and we just forget that there are people out there every day that are doing this. And in a lot of companies, some companies are responsible, some companies aren't responsible. Some will make excuses for this kind of treatment. Some really want to do something about it. But I'm just going to tell you what these companies did. When informed of these findings, a spokesman for Microsoft said the factory supplied one of its contract manufacturers, but the company would still investigate the issue. Representatives from Hewlett-Packard and Lenovo also stated the factory is not a direct supplier, but they too stated they would look into the issue. A spokesman for Dell, for whom the factory is a direct supplier, said it was actively investigating the issue. So they're the only direct supplier. And the spokesman went on to note, "I can tell you that any reports of poor working conditions in Dell's supply chain are investigated and appropriate action is taken." So this is the outcome of these comments. As of early 2010, and this would have been 2 years after they actually went into the plant. As of early 2010, no reports could be found indicating whether any of these companies had investigated the situation and decided upon a course of action. So nothing has been done. I don't know if anything's been done even today. I don't think anything's been done. I did a quick kind of research on it and didn't find anything that has been done in these 2 particular plants. So as far as I know, the conditions that I described to you are still going on today as we speak. These young girls, and primarily young girls, are still working under these harsh working conditions. Some of the excuses that companies do make for this type of treatment is that, okay, it's an indirect supplier, we have no control over them. And I ask you, do they have control over them? And then other excuses are, we pay the local wage. Okay, and when I say excuses, this may or may not be a good excuse. It's kind of up to you to decide that. We pay the going wage, so therefore 64 cents an hour, that's good because everybody else pays 64 cents an hour. And everyone else has the same working conditions, so therefore we have the same working conditions as they do. Everybody has poor benefits, or whatever the case may be, so we have poor benefits. Everybody works mandatory overtime with no overtime pay, so we do the same thing. there are a lot of excuses out there for doing these kinds of things. And I ask you, if you look at this list here, do you think that this particular company or this particular plant, these two plants, are violating any of these principles? These are areas of human rights issues that many companies violate. Do you think they're violating any of these things? We can go through them one at a time. Child and forced labor, yes or no?
Yes.
Why? Well, there's no indication of child labor. What about forced labor?
They're not letting the young woman leave for dates. Somebody have to beg to leave, and that could be.
Okay, but could she leave the employment of this company?
She can, but how would she support herself?
Okay, so you're saying in a way it's kind of forced because
It's manipulative.
because you may not have other good opportunities.
Right.
So it's like you're trapped?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. So it's kind of indirect. Maybe not, this isn't direct, but it's sort of indirect. Okay, working environment and safety standards. I think we can all agree that that's a problem, right? Buying from suppliers who violate human rights. Absolutely, right? We can see that in the report. Depriving freedom to form labor unions. Do we see that directly there? We don't. Do we kind of think that there might be a problem there? If they tried to form a labor union, do you think they'd be successful? Pay and benefits. Problem there? Well, we don't know too much about the benefits. Well, I guess we do, because one of the benefits is having a room and room and board, right? Does the room sound like it's great?
They pay for that, though.
You have to pay for it, though, yeah. That's true. It's not really a benefit. You have to pay for it. And the pay, even though it may be the going wage, is pretty darn low, right? Discriminatory practices in hiring and promoting. We don't know that. We really don't have any proof of that. Forced overtime or taking away vacations. Absolutely. Especially the forced overtime. We don't know about the vacations. But we do know that they work 28 or 29 days a month. Abusive employer-employee relationship. Does it sound like there were some abusive relationships there? So I would say probably this company is violating most of these principles, wouldn't you say? The sad thing is that you're going to go many places in the world, you're going to find situations just like this. So it's more common to find this kind of situation than it is to find the kind of conditions you might find in an American facility. So, all right, well, Dave, take over.
I got some research, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to look at, first of all, some scripture passages, not comprehensive, I didn't get all of them, but just look at some indications in scripture where we had slavery involved, human trafficking, if you will. One of the things we see is kind of a basis, is said in John 8:32, Christ says, the truth shall make you free. So one of the things God wants for us is freedom, freedom from sin, freedom from a lot of things. So that's one of the things that Christ came for. The purpose of his coming. Look back in the Old Testament, some of the early cases we see with this is, you may not have thought about it, Jacob had 12 sons, correct? And yet 8 of these sons were from his 2 wives, his sisters, Leah that he got tricked into marrying, sister Rachel. And how did he end up with the other 4 children? 4 of his 12 sons were from their handmaidens, if you will. They're slaves, slave girls. Because what happened, Leah had 4 children, and Rachel said, this is a ripoff. You're not honoring me, so here, take my slave girl and have some children with her. And that's where we ended with David, Dan, and Naphtali. And then Leah says, well, this isn't fair. Why don't you take my handmaid? And so we ended up with Gad and Asher. So we had 4 of the 12 sons of Jacob came from these slave girls that probably didn't have a whole lot of choice in the whole situation. So we can see situations in the Old Testament we may not have thought about, but that was kind of the situation we see about back at that time. Also, we can see some situations in the Bible where God took and caused some good things to happen. Not that the slavery was good, but just some good things he allowed to happen. First we find in Daniel. I know it was in Daniel 1. He was taken as a slave, wasn't he? He said, go pick the best young princes, if you will, bring them back here. We want to train them so they can go ahead and help serve us. And so Daniel 1, 3-5 talks about that. What good thing happened? He had a significant influence on most of the known world at that time. He was one of the leading people, second and third in command, and had a major impact for God. So some good things happened. I'm not saying God caused it to happen, but God allowed some good things to happen because of some bad situation. He obviously wasn't excited about being in a situation where he was in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language, and having no say in what was happening in his life. We also see with Joseph. It's interesting, his situation, he was sold by his own brothers, and often we see that family members do sell others, sold by his own brothers, kind of get back at him, because here's the brother that's got the silver spoon in his mouth, he gets nice clothes, everybody else is put down. Yeah, we see later on, his brothers come to him and said, hey, we know what Dad's gone now, we're afraid you're really going to nail us. He said, you know, you meant it for wrong, but God meant it for good. So God meant this thing for good. Not that being a slave was good, but God still had some good things. He saved his whole family this way by going down to Egypt. Now, as we already seen the slide earlier, bad things happened later on because of what happened hundreds of years later. But at this time, the people of Israel were saved because of his going into slavery. Also, Naaman. Remember, he was the foreign general that had a slave girl. She goes to his mistress and she said, I know he's got leprosy, but you know, if he could go and back in my home country, there's a prophet that could heal it. He went back, and long and short of it, he got rid of his leprosy. So God, again, allowed a slave girl who had no choice, we don't even know her name, to have an impact on this general and make an impact in his culture. So several situations where God could use some bad for some good, if you will. Some other cases we see in the Old Testament, we also see Hagar. Remember, we had a similar situation. It seems like it was common practice back then. If you couldn't have children, you just go ahead and have your handmaid and have a child be in your name. Hagar. Sarah says, I can't have a child. Why don't you go into Hagar and you can have a child? So she does. Even when she gets pregnant, it doesn't go over very well because she starts kind of making fun of her, you know, of Sarah. Sarah doesn't approve of that, so she sends her away, very harsh with her. And what happens when she flees? An angel comes and says, you really need to go back and be subject to Sarah. And so she was encouraged to go back, which she did. Then later on, after we see Isaac's born, Hagar's son starts making fun of him. And so this time, Abram sends away and says, you go away. In fact, at first she thought she was going to die for lack of water. And an angel came and said, here's some water, and took care of her. And so Arabs came from that situation there. So we see a situation, obviously not very voluntary, not a very happy situation. And God tells us about that in the Bible as well. We've already mentioned Joseph being involved. Philemon, New Testament. Philemon was a slave, ran away, took some of his master's money. Meets up with Paul. Paul brings him back to Christ. Sends a letter that says, hey, talk to his master, says, Philemon left, and he's done some wrong, but if he's done anything wrong, put it on my account, because now he's a brother, not just a slave. So we can see that situation related to. Also, we can see in Joel, I read my devotion this morning, it talks about some of the things they're doing is selling their own children. It goes on and talks about that they're giving a boy for a harlot and a girl for some wine. It's not a very positive situation. Just talk about selling your sons and daughters. Some of the things that promised as punishment, if you will, for some of the choices they were making. Something else we may not think about in Proverbs 22:7 says, the borrower is servant to the lender. Many of the situations with slavery today is because someone is in such bad shape financially, they sell themselves to improve themselves, or they sell their children because they have no money to pay for it. And most of us have a hard time even comprehending that. Someone could that be hard up. But a lot of these people are very destitute, and they're making decisions based on that. One of the things that I was reading as I came across is there's 1.2 million children in India that are involved in prostitution, and 40% of all prostitutes in India are children. 1.2 million, that's a lot of children involved. It talks about the fact that there's several countries that get between 2 and 14% of their gross domestic product from sexual tourism. Sexual tourism. Indonesia, Colombia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand. Sexual tourism, between 2 and 14% of their total economic product. Kind of scary, isn't it? Another thing I read is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world is human trafficking. And the fact that they have estimated the annual profit in 2005, which I'm sure is higher now, was $31.6 billion. $31.6 billion we can see. And we can see often, another thing I came across here is kind of scary because many of you are doing cross-cultural. Female tourists are targeted for sex trafficking, and tourists are very vulnerable. If they kidnap somebody, by the time someone finds out they're missing, it's hours later and they've disappeared. So it shows the importance of even any situation overseas to be very careful. In 2010, they said Thailand and Brazil were the worst child sex trafficking records. Even the adoption process sometimes has been misused. The question then comes, what can we do about it? Each one of you can have an impact, trying to reach the ones around you. There's people in the United States in this situation, trying to meet the needs of those around us. And I think a challenge for us is find ways we can help others. Now, we've been involved in foster care. You don't think of foster care being that, but we had some foster kids that one of them came out of a home in which the 4 children under age 4, they would take food and throw it on the kitchen floor and let them fight for it, except for one of the girls we got. They put her in the crib and no one fed her. 16 months, she still was below her birth weight. You could squeeze the skin together, it wouldn't come back apart. And they really didn't think she'd live through the night. We had her the first 6 months, every day Jane would give her a bath, her hair would get a little lighter because it was just living off the protein. So even being in foster care and other things, you can make an impact on others and really have an impact for God. Find ways around you to reach out and help the people around you. So hopefully that gives you some things.
Well, thank you for Rainy and Dave. And I want to be sensitive to time, and we got a couple more slides, but we want to open it up for Q&A. So if you have any observations, questions, you can direct it to any of us, or you can just raise it, and someone in this room will answer. So it could be someone next to you, because what to say, open session. So let's do that. What is the reaction? Homer?
Going back to the case that was presented, I mean, it seems like there's multiple individuals or groups that we can label as being at fault. I mean, Dell, the company, or investors in Dell, or consumers like us, government. And I just kind of wondered if you would touch on the various responsibilities of maybe one or some of those entities, and then our relationship to that.
Well, I think, you hit on it. I mean, we're all responsible. Everybody's responsible for the abuse of those workers in China and elsewhere, Africa and all over the world, by buying the products. But, there's a lot of issues here. There are a lot of issues of, if you boycott them, then you put other people out of jobs. And there's just so many different issues that you have to grapple with. I think that as Christians, I just pray about something before I do something. I pray about it and say, God, give me the wisdom to make a right choice here on whether I should buy a right product or whether I should invest in something, a company. And I think that God does give you wisdom when you do that, and you just get a clear answer. I just shouldn't do that. But as far as the blame goes, yeah, the investors, sure, the investors who expect profits, growing profits every year, and they'll dump the stock if they don't get growing profit. They have these growing earnings per share and growing stock prices, and they don't benefit from owning that stock anymore. They're going to dump the stock. So they're obviously at fault. The consumers who buy the products, maybe the only choices they have to buy a keyboard are from companies that do this. So maybe they don't really have a clear choice of a company that produces a product that's free of this type of labor. So do you just not buy that product at all? There's a lot of questions there. The companies themselves, yeah, they're partially at fault too. I mean, they want to please the shareholders. They want to produce a product that is competitive. They want to stay in business. They know that globally, if they don't pay these low wages, that their costs are going to go up and their prices are going to be higher, and they're going to sell less, and they're going to have people out of business or people out of jobs within their company. So there's a lot of pressure on everyone to do these things, and I think that you almost have to come together. Everyone almost has to come together. But I had a case. I read a case. And I'm sure most of you know about this case where one person can actually make a difference. It's not just, it doesn't have to be everyone in concert. There was a man who was on the board of directors of a Baptist minister on the board of directors of General Motors. Basically said that if we're going to do business in South Africa, where apartheid was going on, he said that we should abide by these certain principles. And so he laid out the principles. We're going to ignore the apartheid principles, and we're going to adhere by human rights and those kinds of issues. And so from his arguments, what happened was that companies, all over the U.S. companies, began to divest their investments from South Africa and pull out of South Africa. And all this pressure from one man, all this pressure began to hurt South Africa in a way that they had to end apartheid so that they could continue to exist. So then the companies began to move back in after they ended apartheid, and then so that's kind of a story where, you know, it doesn't have to be everyone. It can be one person, but how do you get everyone to start to go in the right direction? I think that's the question.
I had recently read an article about Apple, and
Yep.
they had the exact same kind of things happening in their supplier factories, and
Yep.
it was interesting because it asked some former execs at Apple why it happened and what could be done to stop it. And they said, first of all, of course, on surface level, Apple has policies that their suppliers are supposed to abide by these human rights, but then they don't pay their suppliers enough to actually pay their workers or to have safe environments. But the execs said two things that really hit me. One was that, you know, these stories of factories have been out there, and we're getting almost no negative press for it. If people would speak up and complain, then the execs would do something. But as long as people keep blind eyes, as consumers keep blind eyes, they're willing to let it keep going on. It's directly related to how much negative press they have. The other thing that really hit me was, he said, what is driving Apple and Dell and some of these other companies to do this is, as the American consumer, our insatiable desire for technology. He said, you know, it used to be we could put out a computer and that computer would be good for 5 years. But now we have to produce a new product every year. We have to put out a new phone every 6 months. And because we have to do that, we don't have time to make upgrades to our factories because we're having to retool our factories constantly for these new products. And so that puts it on us as consumers, you know, the fact that, oh, I got an iPad, well, now I'm going to stand out in line a day before the iPad 2 comes out because I have to have the new and latest technology. And it's that kind of greedy desire for the newest and best and demanding it quick and fast and fairly cheap. It's that desire that we have that is motivating the execs to do what they do.
Another part of that is what speaking of the government's role, it's one thing to say what there are laws out there, but it's another thing to say, well, how do we implement or make sure that people are not violating. In one country, they have laws, but they only got 5 people who are going to be the inspecting, might be the 250,000 companies, and how can you do that? As much as most of us do not like our government, I think we should give our government the credit about oftentimes they would insist about the countries that violate human rights we talk to them. They give them pressure, like even China, but the areas where the human rights are being violated. Well, an example that Dr. Lewis gave. Another example is there are Chinese pastors, the house church pastors, who are imprisoned because of their faith. And there are some other people who are imprisoned because they do not agree with what the government says. So that is a violation of human rights too. But the U.S. government give pressure to these countries. Other questions? Maybe one final question? Yes.
This is for Randy. Are you aware of any cases that exemplify this here in the United States, violation of human rights? Because it seems to me whenever we connect the concept of human rights and atrocities against it, it always goes international. It always goes somewhere else. And it kind of elevates our arrogance as a culture to say that we don't have this any longer and that we always take care of it. And as Dr. Chen just said, we constantly criticize other people for not providing human rights. So Is that to say that we here in America have fully given everybody human rights, or do we still have cases that surface in your manuals?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think that we have so many laws and regulations to protect the employee here that it's rare. But there are a lot of, and I'm aware of a lot of small companies that pay very low wages and they pay no benefits, and the people that live in those small towns really don't have any other choice unless they want to move to the big city, and they really choose not to. It's kind of their choice, but there are a lot of small companies that you see some abuses, but really for the larger companies, I'm not aware of, because of all the laws, they would be, they just couldn't do it because there's so many laws out there, labor laws that prohibit that, and an attorney's going to get on that right away. So, to my knowledge, there's not any abuses like that example.
We do have,
but there are some abuses. Yeah, but they're just minor. They're more, subtle, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, we do have labor trafficking in the U.S. We even have it in Michigan.
Yeah. You're right. Absolutely.
And not sex trafficking, but we do have labor trafficking in a lot of times the hotel industry. What they'll do is they'll pay someone, or they'll pay a company to provide maid service. Right. And the hotels will directly pay the company that provides the maid service. And what they don't realize is that this third-party company, their maids are slaves.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because now I can address a situation real quickly that I'm aware of. And this situation is bringing in foreign workers into the United States, and actually Russian workers. And what they do is these companies, they have like 4 different, it's the same company, they have like a hotel and then a restaurant, and then what they do, instead of paying them overtime, what they'll do is they'll have them work 80 hours a week, but 40 hours at this place, 40 hours at this place. It's the same company, but because of our laws, they're able to get around that and pay no overtime, 80 hours a week with no overtime. So there's an example right there. I mean, it does happen. Yeah.
I just saw something else. We have a number of students in this room right now, or in business, or in some of those business-related classes. Anybody that's going to be in business and they're successful, in a few years you're going to be helping make these decisions. So it will no longer be subjective, it'll be your actual choices. So I think it's incumbent on each one of us in those areas of responsibility to use our authority and our influence to try to make a difference. Because we've seen some of our graduates go out here in some very key positions. You can use those positions not just theoretically, but practically to help make sure these things do not happen. So each one of you needs to use this in the future as you service.
Well, to help bring our discussion to closure, we got a few bullets there. One is what if you have not heard it through the discussion, the answer is well, no. To the question, what is overlooking, disregarding, or being very intentional in the violate the human rights issues, but it does not make good business sense. It might be the good in the short term. At the very best, you get some profits, but the guy will punish. Well, Christian owners, and professionals, they can live out the Micah 6:8, not 18. It was being intentional. In fact, when there's so many issues out there, well, that creates an opportunity for Christians to step in. Here is our opportunity to be roaring lambs, which is a term coined by the Bob Reiner, who was on the faculty, and he was a coach, and he was very successful in the communications industry. They said, well, we need to be roaring lambs. And finally, when we get involved in trade, in international business, well, that also provides a venue for us to live out the concept, put in action. Well, we don't want you to be late to chapel, but thank you for coming. Let's thank our panel.